and welcome to India's World. I'm Tracy Shilshi, and today we are focusing on Tibet. Is the decades-long problem with China finally heading to a resolution? Well, questions such as these have emerged in the past few weeks, with Tibetan leader Dalai Lama reiterating at several platforms that Tibet is not seeking independence from China, but wants a bigger share in development and bigger say in issues such as language, religion and culture. Remember, Tibet was invaded by China starting 1949, and 10 years later, the Dalai Lama and thousands of other Tibetans fled to India, where they were given political asylum. Since then, the Tibetan government in exile has thrived in India, while Tibetans under Chinese occupation have been fighting inhumane treatment and alleged genocide. Now, with the Dalai Lama saying that past is past, we should move ahead, what signal does it give to China and Tibetans, and even to India? To discuss this, we have in studio an esteemed panel. We've got Mr. Rajiv Sikri, former Secretary East, joining us. We have Mr. Jayadeva Ranade, former Additional Secretary of Cabinet Secretariat, and Professor Ravi Prasad Narayanan, Associate Professor at the School of International Studies at JNU. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me here in India's World. Mr. Sikri, if I could start with you. Opinions, of course, are, that this demand for autonomy is probably a shift in how the Dalai Lama is now trying to deal with the situation. Do you think so?
No, I don't think so. I think the Dalai Lama is quite realistic that Tibetan independence is not supported by any country, including India, never was.
Yes.
It is practically not possible, and the prospects have receded as China has grown stronger and its grip on Tibet has tightened. So what the Dalai Lama and the Tibetans, as I understand it, are looking for is greater autonomy, cultural autonomy, political autonomy. After all, it's a Tibetan autonomous region. And they are afraid that their culture, religion, way of life is under threat with the increasing migration and settlement of Hans into the region.
Yeah.
The other thing which you did not mention, but I think is a very important one, because the Dalai Lama Chinese government talks broke down, I think, in 2010.
Yes.
Yeah. And the two of the issues were, one, that has Tibet ever been a part, always been a part of China? And the Dalai Lama and the Tibetans says no. So this is a very fundamental thing, because if the Chinese concede that, then the Chinese invasion of Tibet remains what it is, an invasion.
Yes.
So this is a problem. The second, the McMahon line, which is the border between India and Tibet, the Chinese have a problem in accepting that, because, and they may accept the reality, but the McMahon line they will not accept, because if they say that it is a valid agreement signed in Shimla, then it implies that in 1914, Tibet had sovereign treaty-making powers, in which case it was a sovereign state.
Yes.
So what happens there?
Yes.
So these are some of the fundamental issues. Now, the autonomy, I think, is not really, it's a question of negotiating, and after all, the Chinese government was negotiating with the Dalai Lama.
Yes.
But they stopped. So if they are serious about it, well, they should resume the negotiations.
Okay. Mr. Ranade, despite this softening of stance, so-called softening of stance that we're seeing on the part of the Dalai Lama, although he has been saying this for the past few years now, I think as an indication to perhaps, when Xi Jinping came to power, he was being hopeful that maybe this regime is going to see things a little differently, which was of course not the case. In fact, it got more stringent, at least in Tibet, is what the indications were. This softening of stance that we are seeing from Dalai Lama, China has not reciprocated that way. Even now, we don't seem to get any reaction on this. So where do we see this heading?
Actually, you're quite right that there is a modulation, apparent modulation being made by the Dalai Lama right now. But he has, as Mr. Sikri pointed out, he's never asked for independence. In fact, his policy has been very carefully crafted to stop just short of independence and ask for greater autonomy.
Yes.
I think today what he's seeing is, and this resonates with what you said about the hope that perhaps Xi Jinping, because of his mother being a practicing Buddhist, his father having had contacts with the Dalai Lama and his special envoy, that there might be a change in policy. But I think which is why he is making these statements now, that Xi Jinping, after the 19th Party Congress, has come back stronger and
Yes.
possibly in a better position to have this negotiation. But I doubt whether that will happen. As you rightly said, what we are actually seeing is, in fact, hardening of positions in Tibet, and but in a different way. There is more of the velvet glove that is visible than the iron fist, especially with the new party secretary.
Okay.
What they are doing is expanding party surveillance, expanding the party's penetration into Tibet, because their calculation also is that the younger Tibetans need to be tackled, and the monks and nuns, whom the Chinese describe as the real troublemakers, are the ones who have to be actually won over, if at all possible.
Okay.
So I think what we are seeing is the Dalai Lama trying to see whether he can create room or an opening for the talks to resume, for the Chinese to make some kind of contact. And mind you, contacts have been going on even after the talks stopped. You remember people like Xiaonan, etc., have been coming, meeting, and there are others. So I think he's trying that. And the Chinese on their part have maintained the myth always that they have been talking to the Dalai Lama only for facilitating the Dalai Lama's return, and they're talking to him in his personal capacity. But obviously the Dalai Lama is looking at larger issues. So I think all these things have come in together, and that is how I would look at it. I would not look at it as a change in policy.
Okay, okay. Is there a change in strategy though of, how the Dalai Lama is trying to deal with the situation? And there were some reports that perhaps murmurs of discontent among the Tibetan leaders, especially those who've been fighting for this movement. And, with this shift that you're seeing, a more softer Dalai Lama, trying to, a more of a dialogue-based Dalai Lama. He's, of course, always talked about non-violence, but, at the same time, the strategy seems to be moving, at least as at his end. And those discontent that you're seeing among the Tibetan movement leaders, do you see that happening? What is the strategy that, you were seeing in the weeks ahead that we could see?
Yes, the Dalai Lama still holds huge appeal amongst the Tibetan community, both the diaspora and also within China. So his statements, I think, made in Calcutta should be seen very specifically as a response to what has happened after the 19th Party Congress.
Okay.
Because Xi Jinping is going to be at the helm maybe, at least for another 5 years and maybe more. But that is, let's not speculate about that. And here this could be seen as a signaling on the part of the Dalai Lama to say that talks need to be taken forward. But the question is, what would the issue be? Because since both the earlier speakers had said, the panelists had said that autonomy. Now, Dalai Lama has abided by the Strasbourg proposal of the late 1980s, 1989 if I'm not wrong. And there is going to be no going back on those commitments. The Dalai Lama also has made it very clear that he is no longer both the spiritual and the temporal head of the Tibetan community. He is the spiritual head, but the temporal happens to be the Tibetan government in exile. Now, will China be flexible enough to accept that? I don't think so. As one of the panelists had said, because there is a hardening of positions on Beijing's side, and the Dalai Lama appears to be somebody who is most moderate. And if you go by the speech that he had made, to me, it is akin to a sense of signaling to the leaders at the mainland that it's time for talks again, which have been suspended since 2010. And Tibet is non-negotiable for the Communist Party of China. And the whole question is about autonomy. And what kind of autonomy? Is it cultural? And what are the versions of autonomy? It obviously cannot be political. So this is where the ground rules have to be laid out before talks can be taken over. And also, interestingly, till the riots in 2008, the Dalai Lama was in absentia the deputy chairman of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, which many say is a rubber stamp parliament. But nevertheless, after 2008, that post was abolished.
Okay.
And till 2008, it was very clear that the Dalai Lama was welcome to China to reoccupy the post that he had left, and which the seat was basically kept warm so that he can take back that same position that he had left. But that option has been closed.
Okay.
The question is, what is the signaling and where is it going to take both the sides?
Absolutely. And also on the world stage, China has been trying to limit the space for the Dalai Lama, asking certain countries, using its economic might, obviously, in the recent years, whether it be in Germany, South Africa, using its might to not give a space to the Dalai Lama. Do you think that is also another reason why the Dalai Lama needs to perhaps shift this commentary, this narrative a little bit to also cater to a certain kind of audience? Because if you don't have this world, popularity towards Dalai Lama or Buddhism, you don't have that stage. You kind of lose the Tibetan movement otherwise.
Well, my own view is that while global support for Dalai Lama, he's venerated and so forth, is important, it is nothing, it's not at all as important compared to what India is doing. Without the refuge that India has given to the Dalai Lama, the facilities that this government in exile, which we do not recognize, enjoys, the role that India has played in sustaining Tibetan culture, language, the sense of identity, that is huge. So what India does matters. It's not what so much the rest of the world does which matters.
Okay.
That is there, it's peripheral in my view. Secondly, I think the Dalai Lama is also signaling to the Chinese that they are probably better off cutting a deal while he's alive, with him around. Because you've seen in recent weeks the differences between factions of the Tibetan government in exile, I forget the name, in New York, Pemper sharing, and the Prime Minister here. So this will only aggravate after the Dalai Lama is no longer there. And it will be very difficult for the Chinese to find any one credible interlocutor.
Okay.
So I think he's trying to signal, look, you better do it while I'm alive. Whereas in recent years, I think the Chinese strategy was to wait it out. We are not in a hurry. I think that could be some of the problem.
How should India be viewing this? Because China, of course, sees India as, like being pointed out, the only country that's actually propping up the Dalai Lama, and also many times being accused of using the Dalai Lama to their advantage to try and work or arm twist in a certain way. At least that's what China claims to say India does. How is India viewing this? How is India going to be taking this forward?
Well, you mean the Dalai Lama's statements? I don't think India is going to take any cognizance as such. After all, there have been contacts between the Chinese and the Dalai Lama's envoys earlier.
Yes.
So they will continue. But here, if I can just make 2 points, and I would say that, taking on from what was just mentioned about the Dalai Lama's influence, the Chinese have been certainly trying to shrink the space available to him. So last year, in fact, we saw him visit only one country, which is Mongolia. And the Chinese reaction, because of the special status that Mongolia has, was very sharp, very tough. But otherwise, over the last 3 years, his visits abroad, where he has been received officially by the governments, has virtually come down to zero.
Yes.
That's part of Chinese effort. The second effort that the Chinese are making is to try and undermine his influence within the Tibetan community abroad.
Okay.
So you had the Shugden people being instigated, you have the different sects, the attempts to make a division. But I think more importantly, to which there was an allusion made, is the Dalai Lama's own influence. While he may have stepped down as the temporal head, but within Tibet also, his stature is immense. It's very, very high. And there it's a bit of a strange situation, because if he is no longer on the scene, will the Tibetans remain peaceful? That is the big question, and I think the Chinese are well aware of it. There was a senior member of the faculty of the Central Party School 4 years ago, a lady called Chin Wei, who had in fact written a piece saying that at all costs, China must avoid the situation of 2 Dalai Lamas like they have of 2 Panchen Lamas. Now you can imagine the Panchen Lama has been around now for about 10 years, this Chinese selection or more, and the Tibetans still refuse to call him Panchen Lama. They refer to him today as a learned monk, but they don't call him a Panchen Lama. And I think her point was that if at the time of reincarnation or whatever, there is another Panchen Lama, Dalai Lama who's not under the control of the Chinese, it could spell a lot of trouble. So I think that is also a hint that the Dalai Lama is giving, that let's talk now and let's see. And if I can just go a little further, I think one of the things that probably is causing him concern and causing others concern is the insistence by the Chinese that for jobs within China, particularly within the Tibet Autonomous Region, Chinese language is a must. I mean, they have to pass the exams in Chinese, which means it's a subtle way of actually bringing down the importance of Tibetan.
Yes.
And I think that will be causing them concern.
All right, all right. Coming back to, of course, the India, angle to this, can India allay, these concerns that China has of propping up Dalai Lama? And we understand that it's never been a mediator as far as talks are concerned. None of the countries have been. But do you think it's time now for India to perhaps act as a, as a facilitator for a mutual agreement between both countries, and in that sense, perhaps gain, further favor from from Chinese as well?
I don't think India can play a role as a facilitator, because Beijing does not encourage any other country interfering in what it terms its domestic affairs.
Okay.
When it comes to His Holiness Dalai Lama, I'll agree with Mr. Banerjee here. The signaling that is taking place
Mr.
is
Ranade,
also...
yes. Yes.
Ranade, yes,
Okay.
sorry. Where the Dalai Lama, I think, is also preparing the grounds for what will happen in the Tibetan community, who's going to be the spiritual inheritor. And he's preparing the grounds as of now, which is where he would want less friction, at least from the Chinese side. Because the Dalai Lamas, it shouldn't go the way of the Panchen Lama. So that is what he would want. That is in his interests, and also in the interests of all the Tibetans, most of them in China, of course. So India, we do not have actually a hand to play, but for the fact that the Tibetan diaspora is largely settled in India.
Yes.
But then who are these Tibetan diaspora? Most of them are from, I would say, the elite, who have managed to get across the mountains and come to India, and then who would want to use India as a base for a short while before migrating elsewhere. Now this is a situation which we have to manage. And we have to see that there is no crisis when it comes to a successor when it finally comes, when that day finally comes, that there is no friction within the Tibetan community. But no, we cannot be a facilitator, because China will not want any country to play the role of an intermediary, and leave alone India.
Okay. In hindsight, Mr. Sikri, do you think India has lost a beneficial relationship with China, by taking on an issue like Tibet, taking on the Dalai Lama, giving it, asylum? Do you think in hindsight?
Well, I'm very clear that the Tibetan issue is the core issue in India-China relations. Without the Chinese invasion of Tibet, the crackdown there, and the fleeing of the Dalai Lama to India, I think our relations would have been much better. In 1956, the Dalai Lama came to India on the 2500th birth anniversary of Lord Buddha, and Chow En-lai followed him. And all the discussions that took place in 1956 were about Tibet and Dalai Lama. So the Chinese were very concerned about this matter. Now, if you look at, say, what happened in 1959, this is soon after the Dalai Lama had fled to India. And the Chinese control of Tibet was quite weak at that time. So the Chinese were worried. So maybe what happened on the border was reflecting some attempt to create pressure on India. You also then follow it up with Chow En-lai's visit in 1960, April 1960, where he wanted a settlement because China was weak. They wanted a settlement to solve the Tibet problem. It is not so much the border. I mean, this whole business of Arunachal being southern Tibet, this is all poppycock which has come up later on. The real issue was that what is going to be the status of Tibet? And unless there is only an India-Tibet border, boundary. There's no India-China boundary. So when we talk of thousands of years of India-China friendship, I don't agree with that at all. The only contacts were with odd pilgrims here and so forth, traders. So the Tibet issue is the core issue in India-China relations. And unless this is resolved, and this will not be resolved, unless China and the Tibetans work out an arrangement themselves. And I don't see India politically, any government, being able to say, okay, we're just going to forget about it. Even in 1959, Mr. Nehru gave asylum and refuge to the Tibetans because there was a lot of public pressure. And don't forget a lot of the Dalai Lama is equally revered in India among non-Tibetans and Hindus as he is in Tibet. So there is this domestic angle also, political angle, religious sentiments, which is all mixed up. And it's not easy for any government to sort of simply say, okay, you know, you do what you like. It's not going to be easy.
Okay, okay.
You see the problem which you're having over Rohingyas?
Yes, that's right.
Now, can you imagine what would happen if similar thing happened with Tibetans?
Yeah, they've been largely a peaceful community, which is why we've not seen them as a threat to our national security or for that matter. So, Mr. Ranade, has India been able to use it to its advantage? Maybe not with China, but at least on the global stage?
Well, I would say that, you know, this is something that has been propagated, Tibet card or the Dalai Lama card. I don't think India has looked at it as a card.
Okay.
I think, you know, we have always given refuge to whoever has been in difficulty through the centuries, not just now. And this was one more case. Of course, it has helped us in the sense that the Dalai Lama himself, the respect that he has earned, mind you, I like to say that when he came over, he came without a shirt on his back. It's another matter that he didn't wear any. But the amount of respect that he today has earned, the kind of stature that he has, international stature, naturally it reflects somewhat on India and the manner in which it has given him refuge. And I think everyone recognizes that despite Chinese pressure on India, India has not wavered. They have allowed him to be here, they've allowed him to be free, you know, and do what he likes.
That's right.
The second thing is, naturally, the fact that he's here and when he goes abroad and interacts with other world leaders, certainly, you know, it's a kind of, shall I say, manifestation of our soft power. And he himself is very, shall I say, fond of India. He does accept that he owes a lot to India, and he makes it quite plain when he goes abroad. So that helps us too. But I would say one thing as a note of caution, that is the recent 19th Party Congress. The statement by the Vice Minister of the United Front Department, Changi Cheong, who's now become who's also now a full-fledged Central Committee member, he made two things I think which are worth note. One, that the Dalai Lama has set up the administration in exile, and he continues to you know, work at it and interfere, and that is set up in Dharamsala. It's something that the Chinese are very upset about.
Yes.
Indicating that I think China will start applying now increasing pressure on us with reference to the Central Tibet administration or to the Tibetan administration in Dharamsala. And the second is his description of Tibetan Buddhism as an ancient Chinese religion, indicating that you know, the Chinese are willing to take on Buddhism and do more for it, Tibetan Buddhism.
Yes.
But this sits very uneasily with the steps that they took in November, where they issued directives saying that all actions and movements by Tibetan Buddhist monks must be monitored very carefully.
Yes.
So I think there is a dichotomy going on there. And I would say that let's see what Xi Jinping can do, but I think his own ability to ease restrictions, etc., will be limited by the influence and the investment by state-owned enterprises, by other senior cadres, etc., who will influence the decision.
All right, very quickly then, possible solution, possible change in the scenario that we can expect in the coming years. The road ahead is only when the Dalai Lama is in power, get things done during that period. Is that it?
Yes, two quick points. The Dalai Lama's speech in Calcutta, he made it very clear that he's going to, he'll be interested in development of Tibet.
Yes.
And here I feel he wants to forestall a demographic alteration taking place in Tibet, like what has happened in Xinjiang.
Okay.
Where the Uyghurs were a majority, but now are a minority when in face of the influx of the Han. The second aspect is China would not want the Dalai Lama to be the spiritual leader of the Tibetans for the simple reason it goes against the ethos of the Communist Party of China. They do not want somebody who's got the charisma of a religious leader, and hence you will have somebody lording over a province, but who in effect is a religious person.
Okay.
It goes against the very foundational ethos of the Communist Party of China, which is why they would want the Dalai Lama to kowtow to whatever Beijing wants him to do.
Okay.
Now, which is where I believe most of us in the panel, we agree that maybe this is the Dalai Lama's way of signaling that it's time for talks.
Yes.
But what those talks are, well, in the coming months, we'll know.
Absolutely. All right, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on this debate. We look forward to your feedback and also your suggestions. Write into us at indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. That's it from me. Thank you.